Hello and welcome to Clean Chemicals. I'm your host, Aaron Lee, and today I'm joined by Tim Robinson, the founder of Chemion. Now, through Chemion, Tim is on a mission to decarbonise wastewater treatment whilst balancing environmental responsibility with operational efficiency. So, Tim, thanks for coming on.
You're welcome. Nice to be here.
I think the best place to start is if you just talk a little bit about your, early career, what sort of got you into the world of chemicals, and I guess more specifically, water treatment.
Well, that probably started about 20 years ago, actually, when I got my first proper job after leaving university. And, without sort of, no pun intended, but it's just something that I fell into in terms of like getting into the water side of things. And after leaving university, did a postdoc, which was extremely water based. I was looking at biological systems and then the chemistries associated with it. So, got a real job looking at industrial wastewater treatment. Then a few years later, I've now set up my own company with another co-founder, and that company ran up until 2020, so just before COVID, and it was acquired by Veolia. And since then, Chemion was percolating. And between that time of 2020 and last year, I went back to school, did a bit of studying, got a master's, but I also got involved in things like climate tech and sustainable chemistries, green chemistries, and that then led on to what is now Chemion. And the gist of Chemion is providing low carbon chemistries, and we help customers decarbonize their wastewater treatment process. So that's a quite a rolled in summary over 20 years.
So would you say that was something you were thinking about before launching Chemion, or was that something that really came into the front of your mind whilst you were studying and learning more on climate tech and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, especially once I moved from the previous business, which was all consuming, it gave me time to step back and actually just have a bird's eye view of actually in the next stage what I want to do. I didn't want to do exactly the same thing as I did before, but I also had a good foundation in terms of technical and sort of customer base. And so I actually got involved in a startup generator in Cambridge, a company called, or a foundation called Carbon 13, which was basically various founders come in with ideas. And actually, I went in there to learn. I thought I'll go in and I'll help some people grow their ideas. But actually, when I get in talking to people, I didn't realize, but most people actually were interested in water and wastewater and how they could reduce the environmental impact of everything associated with it. So I quickly got involved in that, the technical aspect, and then ideas grew, and they ranged from things like using natural solutions like algae, not only in wastewater treatment, but actually to produce chemistries and chemicals, which and sustainable air fuels, all these things that can come out the back end, but also to capture the greenhouse gases that are emitted through the wastewater treatment process. And so that was really a really exciting time. And sort of from that, seeds germinated, looking at, well, actually, how can I make an actual impact whilst using the foundation of my previous career. And then that led to Chemion, because there was that integration of actually having an immediate impact using low carbon chemistries, where we're just swapping out existing chemistries. It's exactly the same stuff, and you get an immediate carbon reduction for that particular customer and process.
So which scope is it mainly focused on? Because I think your website lists scope 3, but it sounds like
Correct.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's so that would be, for a customer's point of view, it'd be their supply chain, which makes up the majority of the carbon emissions from most processes, and therefore it is the most trickiest to understand and actually nail down, because some people don't report, some people do, and it's just very hard to sometimes put a label and a number through various processes that make up this huge supply chain, and that's a huge challenge. So we're just doing our bit within that supply chain.
Yeah, I've written about this recently, actually, on sort of life cycle assessment around, and it's something we've spoken about as well, actually, because on the face of it, a lot of certainly the chemistries that can be used sound great and sound green and hey, they may well still be better than their alternative chemistries, but there is also so much that does not get looked at. The farming of raw materials and resources, how those raw materials get from point A to point B, because some of these are traveling across the globe. Waste that's generated, how that's handled, any water generated in the process. It is an absolute can of worms. I mean, I don't even know, um, how to get really started on things like that. It's a mammoth project.
It is. It's really complex, and that's why I think when it comes down to terminology, and you're trying to put a label or a description on, let's just use a chemical product. So let's say a chemical product is labeled as sustainable, but what does that mean? It's quite a subjective interpretation. What's sustainable to me might not be what it is to you, or there might be various grades or shades of how sustainable that is. And so, and it's because it's sustainability, as you said, is a complex issue. It's made up of social, economic, and environmental aspects, and each one of those is quite complex in their own right. And so, just as you mentioned, the life cycle assessment, this is a tool that we use for our products because sustainability can be quite a woolly title, especially as far as chemistries are concerned. Whereas if you use the LCA, the life cycle assessment, what we're particularly interested in as far as chemicals goes is the environmental impact it has in terms of its production, use, and then potential disposal at the end. So, and the nice thing about the life cycle assessment, it ultimately, of course, feeds into whether a thing is sustainable or not. But as far as a chemical goes and environmental impact, we're looking at, and we can easily, there's a metric, there's a measurement, it's universal. So rather than saying something is sustainable, well, what we're doing now is we're taking all the components, the raw material extraction, the processing, the distribution, the use, the water use, all of this is compiled in this life cycle assessment. And we get a number at the end, and that is the carbon footprint of the product. And that is kilograms or tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per ton of product produced. So that gives you an exact metric, and then you've got a number rather than just a phrase. And so that's why we tend to be metric heavy as far as that goes, because it's quantifiable, it's relatable to wherever you are in the world or whatever the process is. And so, yes, I think that's definitely a good step forward in terms of how a company or someone might determine whether something has a low, medium, or high environmental impact.
Yeah. Forgive me, but I mean, because it sounds great, right? And sounds, it's one of those things, easy to say, hard, must be so hard to implement because you're so reliant on information from, both sides, suppliers, customers, I suppose, service providers. And I'm not obviously I haven't been as in water treatment over my career as you have, but I've certainly found water treatment to be quite I don't know if stale's the right word, but very bed in industry. They've used the specific chemistries, for example, they've been using for decades and decades. How easy is it to speak to operators, purchasing teams, and sort of say, I know you're doing it this way, but have you considered this way?
Yeah, it's a tough one to crack because again, you have a lot of factors at play, and when it comes to the likes of water companies, the municipal water treatment companies, cost is obviously a big thing, and obviously there's a risk element in that it has to work because if it doesn't work, the consequences can be quite severe. So it's almost there is a bit of that sort of mindset is we've always done it this way because it works, and therefore the process what you're using is commoditized, so it is down to price. That being said, there are a lot of R&D and sort of projects open to companies such as Chemion and other companies, and it has been for years, where you get the chance to try out innovative technologies and certainly around chemistries, and that has been done and it is going on at the minute. And actually, Chemion is just going through that process at the minute where we're looking at green and bio products to be added and supplemented into the wastewater treatment process in both industrial and municipal. So we've applied for various accelerators and grants for that at the minute, just to develop this idea further. But so I guess to answer your question is, companies are, in fairness to them, are open to discussing and look at new technologies. But obviously, once it moves down the conveyor belt, all of these sort of economic and sort of scale up issues come to play. Surety of supply, where it comes from. We go back to, well, if this product or process, if this product isn't coming, within the EU, for example, if it's coming from Australia, is it worth it? There's risk. There's the carbon footprint of shipping. All of these things, once you actually prove that it works, you've got to factor in, and rightly so. So this is the challenge, but it's always the way. But yes, it's not a closed book. I don't think it's a hard one to crack, but people are willing to look at it, which is a really positive thing.
So who are the sort of clients you look to work with at the moment?
So probably at the minute we focus on industrial wastewater treatment, and so we then are selective because, with respect to people who run businesses, people have different priorities in terms of what they want from their business, and I understand even everyone has to make a living, etc. So there are certain companies who maybe have an environmental agenda which is higher up their to-do list. And so those are the companies that we want to work with and we are working with. So we're not sort of speaking to all and sundry, because it could be a wasted conversation. So the people that we would like to work with must be aligned with our values, which is actually having this actual impact on reducing the carbon footprint. Because if that's not on your radar or it's not high on your priorities, it should be. But if it's not, then you probably just may as well just stick with what you do, because the actual information and data that we're giving you would be irrelevant. So it's finding that match where there's that sort of I said that the two sort of philosophies match up.
Okay, so how do you balance being sort of nimble enough for, I guess I hate using the word, but bespoke, solutions or options for companies, but also still offering that sort of like reliability and large scale supply? Because I know, like you mentioned Veolia earlier, they're obviously giants, and so there's certain things that a Veolia can do that Chemion can't, and vice versa. So
Yeah, correct. And it's the same for any sort of SME versus a big sort of global corporation. There's advantages and disadvantages. There's potential advantages of economies of scale at that high level. But as you said, if you come down to a smaller SME, the word you used was nimble. Well, that's a huge plus factor versus potentially the bigger cogs in a bigger corporation. But then the challenge there is maybe it's a bit more of a harder fight to sort of speak to those people who you need to be speaking to, because they don't know you. It could be a new process, a new technology. So these are all things that you're sort of constantly fighting against. But that's just part of how it is. So it's always a toss up between that sort of the advantages of a large corporation, and then actually listening to smaller companies that are coming through potentially with a new way of doing things or a different way of doing things. And people who are receptive to these, they can make their own minds up. Sometimes it works for them, sometimes it doesn't. It's the same for anything in life. So you just got to keep speaking to the right people and just see what the answers are. So yeah, it's always a challenge, but once you have those conversations with the right people, those are the type of people we want to be speaking to.
yeah, okay. I mean, there might be an obvious answer to this, but why do this? Because you don't have to do this. You've been successfully in this industry for a long time, and this is quite novel. It's a lot of effort, a lot of work. So I wonder why you've decided to do this. You said you had enough time to think about what you wanted to do, and ultimately this is the conclusion you've come to. So
Yeah, well, so I did a bit of consultancy as well and I still do, but I did mostly consultancy for a few years, and as time went by, although the projects were exciting and all that sort of stuff, it was predominantly desk based. You would sort of do little bits of projects and back out, and actually ultimately I found it pretty unfulfilling, and I missed sort of looking at proper problems, having the freedom to actually think of my own solutions or put my own solutions in place. But most of all, actually, I just wanted to make a difference, and whatever that, how small that difference might be. But with various job invites and whatever over the years, the question I always ask myself is will it stimulate me, but also what difference can I make in that role on whatever it is I'm doing? And most of the times the answer was, well, I'm not quite sure, but I'm pretty sure once I get into it, it'll be very limited, and I'll get frustrated for all those reasons. So yeah, so it's one of those things where I just wanted to make a positive difference in whatever I'm doing, and that's what's and you're always a sucker for the fight and the excitement of growing a business. So that's it's hard to beat, even with all the trials and tribulations that come with it.
Yeah, amen. I wonder, could you walk through a real or hypothetical scenario of how you might diagnose a client's challenges and propose a solution to solve these? What you're looking to solve. How to decarbonize that water treatment
Yeah,
process.
sure. Well, a lot of it comes with the client interaction, and I guess it's a bit like we touched on before. When it comes to, if you're looking just at the carbon profile, for example, most people I've spoken to, 9 out of 10, 9.5 out of 10, have no clue of even what the environmental impact might be of their process or the chemistries associated with the process. Now, as a whole, the chemistries just make up a part of that carbon footprint of the process. You've got, the major consumption is electricity. That's one thing where, that's sort of, that's a given. But in terms of the chemistries, yes, it may well be that the customer just is unaware, and sometimes, honestly, they might not care, because it does the job. You've got two things to consider when we're talking to customers: is the performance and reliability, and also then the carbon footprint. So that's why it's pretty important that we speak to the people who have the carbon footprint on their agenda, because we can provide the chemicals and technical solution, which will still work and cover the process plant. That's fine. But ultimately, we're not giving any value added or any additional information or metric around the carbon footprint. So it may well be we go to site, see their products, either find out accurately what the carbon footprint of those particular products are, and that, or if we don't, we may have to find out where the raw material comes from, but through the supply chain, where that supply chain comes. You have sort of, sometimes that can be more successful than others. So there is a lot of homework in determining or getting a ballpark figure of what the product carbon footprint is. The flip side is our equivalent products. We know what the carbon footprint of our equivalent products, as in the high carbon products, if you like, and also our low carbon products. So worst case scenario, we can give a budget and say, look, based on what we would put in here, this is what the carbon footprint is. Based on what we can put in now, replacing that, this is the carbon avoided, and we can equate that to trees planted per year, miles driven in a car, all this sort of stuff. So it just depends, and again, especially in the food and beverage industry, where we work predominantly or mostly, they're quite on top of carbon reporting and stuff. So the information that we're gathering will actually ultimately feed into what they require at the end of the year for their their ESG audits or whatever. So again, it's speaking to the right people and speaking to the right clients, where we're killing two birds with one stone, but we're making sure they're compliant with the water treatment, but we're also ensuring they have the lowest carbon products. They've got a metric to measure, and then that also means we can put a plan in place to bring it down. And ultimately, what we can do at the end of the process, once we've got a survey of the whole plant and we understand what the total carbon footprint is, we can supply ethical carbon credits, so we can net it off if that's what they wanted to do, and you could say that process is net zero. So there's various levels of that process and how you do it, but most of it is on-site client interaction and a lot of spreadsheet analysis.
So are you almost at the point where you have a parameter on a specification to say carbon value, if you like? I don't know what you're calling it, but or carbon footprint.
Yeah, exactly that. And so again, when it's relevant to supply chain, we will predominantly use suppliers or supply chains where they will use the current ISO accreditations and how they calculate their life cycle analysis or their carbon footprint, so that we know if we are taking information from the supply chain, it's verified and it'll stand up. So whenever we then add in our calculations, we know that it's coming from a good source and it's been verified. And ultimately, then yes, that gives them a number where we can work from and a number we can bring it down. And this is a process as a company we're going through at the minute. So at the end of March, we'll have gathered a year's worth of data in our activities, and we're on the same journey as well of putting a plan in place and then putting a reduction plan in place so that we can strive to be net zero. And it may well be at the end of that period, we will say, look, we can bring our carbon down to as much as we can. Our fleet in GB is now all electric. We're using renewable electricity for our office and office spaces. There's things that we can physically do, but when we get to that baseline, we can say, well, okay, we can then purchase a carbon credit, and then that nets off our activities, and that's applicable for customers too.
So when you say ethical carbon credits, what do you mean by that?
So the carbon market can be a bit grey in terms of accountability. And so, for example, if you came to me and said, I need 10 carbon credits, yeah, no problem. That'll cost you 200 quid, and I'll send you an email with a certificate. Now, you don't know, so there's, I'm not saying that happens all the time, but there's certainly a platform for unscrupulous dealings to be had. So if we do go down that route, we use verified sources so that everything can be traced back and there's a proper paper trail. So, for example, we will be able to prove that the carbon credits that have been sold to you have actually been taken out of commission. So people aren't just selling the same carbon credits over and over, but also we can then give a link and a trail from where this might be. So it may be reforestation in the Amazon or whatever. So there's a clear pathway and certification of that process. Whereas, as I said, there is an opportunity for unscrupulous dealers to ignore all of that and just make money by selling non-existent carbon credits.
Is this also countering, okay, we consumed X amount of carbon, but we also planted, or we bought a forest, or we bought 8 trees or something to offset it?
And so it's something that we don't discuss at the front end of any carbon reduction plan, because it's almost like that's the last. Once we've exhausted everything, that is the last thing. Yeah. It shouldn't be a shortcut just to keep on doing what you're doing and then you buy your way out of it. That's not on the agenda.
Yeah, clear. So one thing I've kind of gleaned through this conversation is that although we're talking a lot about chemistry and things in the water treatment sector, which it makes sense, that's your sector, it well, you've got well-established partners and stuff in that sector, but a lot of this is relevant across all sectors, to be honest. Being able to deep dive into the products they're using, the raw materials they're using, and assign it a kind of value around the carbon footprint of that product. So I don't know if you have any plans in the future to step away from water treatment and apply this. I don't know if you call it technology. I don't know enough about what the actual behind the scenes workings, or whether a lot of it is legwork and how much of it is automated, or whether the plan would be to automate it. I mean, I think we've even spoken about this in the past. I'd had this harebrained idea of kind of assigning a chemical a green score, if you like. Not a great name for it because green is so subjective as well, but an easy reference for someone to say, if I've got I've got 2 options of chemistries to apply. Maybe I can't separate them on performance. Maybe I can't separate them on price, but one is so devastating to the environment, the other is not, or is better, worse, whatever. It's another way of making better decisions early on.
Yeah, and actually, in the retail market, the limited sort of bit that I do know, but again, speaking with people over the last few years, those types of processes are already in place. So, for example, if you look at the manufacture of, say, a bottle of shampoo, you've got all those various chemical components go in there. You've got the plastics, you've got all the energy, all that. So there are models, and people are using AI to get real-time data, or where there's data is missing, they'll use AI to source multiple sources to get the best estimate of what that sort of particular carbon value is for that particular part of the process. And there are quite a few companies that are just using, it's basically software, and ultimately they will give you at the end, just like you're sort of intimating, but like the food labels on food at the minute, where they have a traffic light system, which is probably a way of putting a metric to what we said at the start about sustainability. It gives you a grade of how sustainable that is, rather than just saying this product is sustainable. So there are lots of people working on this software, and it's really clever at the minute. And we do use some of those processes to actually get raw material data, and then they're constantly refined. And again, this is just the power and evolution of AI in terms of just getting this huge massive data and filtering it into a program and a process. So it is happening, and there's quite a few people working on it, and it is really interesting. Yeah.
Okay. So just moving the conversation slightly. So recent events, define recent, but if we think about COVID, for example, if we think about the Red Sea crisis, Key Bridge collapse, things I've spoken about at length, have really highlighted the volatility of the supply chain. Now, I wonder how you and Chemion would mitigate risks like those and raw materials shortages, shipping disruptions, and how those sorts of things impact what you're trying to do. Because again, it's all well and good building, I wouldn't say perfect options and supply chains, etc., but so many unforeseen things can crop up and impact those. So I wonder how you go about, you've got a plan A, which is carbon X, carbon footprint X, but what's plan B and C? How do you build in that risk mitigation as well as getting these more working towards net zero?
Yeah. Well, I think like when it comes to the supply chain, our filtering starts at, is it coming from the other side of the world? If it is, then that gets parked to the side because of just the travel miles, and also the risk of getting stuck in the Suez or whatever it is. So those are things where we'll filter those down, and actually which makes common sense. Most of our products, in fact, all of our products, are either sourced within the EU or they're sourced within the UK, and there might be the odd exception where we might have to import, but that is a decision that's made on, like, is there no other alternative? Can we mitigate this any other way? Because that is important to us, and we have to factor that in. So 95% of the products and raw materials that we use come from in the EU and certainly in the UK. And actually, one of the R&D projects we're working at the minute, which is sort of tries to tackle that scenario that you've just put there, is having a bio-based or plant-based or green chemistries are good. They're even better if you can grow and source them and supply them within the country that you're using them. So for this case, the UK. So this is an area that we're looking at the minute, and we're developing this over this calendar year. So hopefully we'll be releasing sort of milestones as we go along. But that's something where we feel that's quite important, because it really answers that thorny issue, or that big global risk of surety of supply, whether you have it's just things getting stuck where you don't want to be stuck. And certainly in the water treatment industry, that can be process critical, and so that's another big a big bonus around the lower carbon footprint, lower travel miles. It's a renewable, it's sustainable, all of that things defined within this LCA assessment to give you the carbon footprint. So yeah, there are definitely things that we will try and mitigate as much as we can do, and that means sourcing locally as a first protocol, basically.
Okay, so I guess that's the next stage for Chemion, is also bringing those raw material productions to the UK. Is there any other innovations, product lines, sustainability initiatives you guys are aiming for in the near future?
Well, at the minute, I said, as far as innovation goes, it is looking and developing this. We've got one sort of key product that we're focusing on this year. Instead, we're just going through a couple of stages in terms of working with partners and innovation labs to get this sort of up and going. So that's in process at the minute. and that one has, it has a wide ranging sort of potential. Again, it's mostly water treatment, but across all aspects of water treatment in terms of replacing current chemistries with this sort of homegrown, low carbon footprint, low travel miles product, which is renewable. So that's sort of where we're going, because the people that we are speaking to, both in municipal water treatment and industry, that would be a really big sort of plus, and everyone wins from something like that. The local economy, local people, local industry, and we just sort of not wasting travel miles by shipping water or stuff around the world, which is a real bugbear.
So, what does success look like for Chemion as a company? If you could fast forward 5, 10 years, and
Well, it looks like. Well, I guess the litmus test will be whether the sort of the people that the customers we have at the minute grows, but also that actually the companies that we're speaking to who are on these net zero journeys, net zero 2030, that's 5 years away. We'll get there. In our conversations, a lot of people don't actually have a particular actual plan in place, and so that's slightly concerning. So I guess success for us in 5 years is actually those people who don't have plans. In our little bit of what we do, we can get you on a plan, and we can actually make a difference to your overall carbon footprint. We can quantify it, we can reduce it, and we can prove it through the various accreditation. So that's probably what success looks like. And I guess that'll definitely be determined about whether companies and corporations with net zero aspirations are actually going to act on them. Because if they're not, then what our two missions won't line up. But I don't think that's going to happen. Everyone I've spoken to and our current customers are very much on board with what we're doing, and I just see that just throughout the industry, because people actually do care, and where people can make a difference, they are trying to do their best, and all we're doing is just trying to help along the way. So success looks like, yeah, look, we've got a growing customer base, but actually the definition of that customer base will only grow if people are on board with reducing the carbon footprint and actually opening their eyes to look at sort of new chemistries and processes, and yeah, that's how it'll be determined whether success or not. So far so good anyway.
so just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, you'd say most people you're speaking to do well, other than obviously the select few who have different priorities, and I would probably say those probably fall under the founder box, where there's a bit more of a different concern for them personally. But a lot of the people we talk to do want to do this, be greener, be more sustainable, reduce their carbon footprint, but they just have not got a clue how to do it and where to start.
Yeah, and like some companies I've spoken to, for example, in the in food processing or food manufacture, as you'd appreciate, their supply chains are just immense, and so looking into their scope 3 emissions and trying to speak to suppliers in India or Europe or South America, it's just a nightmare, and so that it will take a time, and it is a complex issue. So it's one of those where, like, what this sort of small bit, the impact that we have on your particular process, yes, it can be quite small, but actually we can give you an instant sort of reduction and improvement. And when we're using our low carbon chemistries, mostly it's just a swap out. There's no change in performance. Usually there's not much change in price. And so it's one of those ones where the question I pose is, like, if you could have the same level of treatment without compromising performance, but with a lower carbon footprint to sort of answer your ESG goals, why wouldn't you do it? There's nothing to lose. So, but again, it's making people aware of that there are other alternatives, there are options, there are the way of using similar chemistries, but maybe reducing your carbon footprint by 70-80%. It can be done. But again, if you don't know, you don't know. So it's my job to sort of be get that out there, so people understand, and then they'll soon realize, actually, this is a piece of the pie that we can nibble away out quite quickly, get it out of the way, and then we can move on to the more complex supply chain.
Yeah. So sounds like your biggest hurdle really is exposure more than anything. Is enough people knowing about the service that you can offer them.
Yeah, and and again, it just takes time. But as you sort of grow your customer base, then people speak within groups, and it is that it's all of that. But that's always been the way. And as I said, and a lot of it is if you can prove and show how it works and how successful it can be, which we can, thankfully, that makes it easier as well. So yeah, it's all part of the process, and gradually it builds momentum, and then people realize, well, why didn't we do that before? Because there's no difference, but we just get better numbers, and therefore that helps us in the grand scheme of things of our sustainability goals.
Well, one thing I know is, and in my own experience with, and this was, I mean, I'm not as into water treatment as you are, as I mentioned earlier, but trying to speak to a refinery to just understand a little bit more about their ESG, and it was like a needle in a haystack. I think as soon as I sort of phoned up and started poking around ESG, they're like, "Whoa, get off, get away from me now!" Thinking I was some nefarious journalist or something, trying to unlock all their secrets. But
Yes, I can imagine some industries would be a bit more guarded and less willing to sort of open Pandora's box because they just know what's in there. Whereas again, in food and beverage, actually, it's quite nice because it's more transparent because the supermarkets who dictate what the suppliers do, they want transparency. They want probably ultimately to have those labels on the goods to say how sustainable it is or what's in it, and that can only happen when they put pressure on their suppliers, and then
yeah,
consequently when they put pressure on people like us to come back and give them these numbers. That's how it all works. So that's quite a nice sector to be in because there is the desire, or certainly there is willing, whether it's forced or voluntarily, but there is willing for that for them to get that information. So it makes that sort of conversation less likely to happen because they are on a mission. They have got objectives to do it, and it's just basically showing people sometimes like it can be done. Don't get sort of caught up in all the various supply chains. So yeah, that's what we're here to do.
yeah. I mean, you mentioned earlier one of your gripes is shipping stuff across the world, perhaps when you don't need to. Obviously that's not always possible. I mean, particularly if you're shipping water when you don't need to, if you can take a raw material and put it back into water, so you're reducing the amount of storage space, even footprint on boats and whatever. And one of my biggest gripes is opacity, is about, so people. I get why people are super protective of their supply chain and keeping it hidden because they're so worried about being cut out of that process. But I always kind of took the stance when launching my business in a way like you have with your values around what you're trying to achieve, is that if those don't line up with the customer or client you're working with, then it's a non-starter anyway. And I kind of took that stance on opacity. If someone wants to cut me out to save my fee, then I don't want to work with them anyway. Because if
Yeah,
that's how they work, because it's a really short-sighted view. Um, yeah, so yeah, that's always my gripe, and it's how people can claim to be ethical and or sustainable when they don't actually even know where their product's coming from. So it's
yeah, yeah, and I agree. And again, when it comes to our supply chain, we're very open, and but again, some people are more curious than others, and some people just say, look, as long as the numbers are verifiable and it does what it says on the tin, we're happy with that. Some people might say, well, how does it get this low? Where does it come from? And happy to explain that, and how the process works, and how we get the carbon footprint down. So, but it's just having that ready, and the information we're ready to share, because ultimately, if they're better informed and they understand the process, then they're more willing to take on the technology and the chemistry because they understand again their life cycle assessment of the product as far as they're concerned, and ultimately how it works on their particular plant. So yeah, I totally get it.
so if a client, do you have different ways you work with clients? Because I sense you probably will have a way where you would say sell the product. Say, right, you want to say you use X product, we can sell you X product, but a more carbon friendly, excuse the language, carbon friendly version, or we can sell you an alternative product, which is maybe performance is the same or better or slightly worse, but your carbon footprint is reduced. but then do you
Mhm.
also offer a kind of auditing package, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it is just as simple as just saying, look, product A can be substituted from product B. Product A has a carbon footprint of 500. This one has a carbon footprint of 150. But ultimately, you still have to go to site to prove it and sort of do the technical stuff. So that never changes, and actually, we wouldn't do one without the other anyway. So it's one of those where yes, it's quite involved. It's on site. It's speaking to the right people. It's doing the test work. It's proving that the chemistries, are easily slot in. But it may also be as well is that you know other ways to chip away at the carbon footprint is, for example, well, if you're getting 10 deliveries a month because you're using a product that's 2%. Well, if you can use a product that's 4%, then you're going to get 5 deliveries a month. So we're saving transport miles. You're also improving the health and safety of vehicles on site. So little simple things like that, anyone can do. But it's just going to site to understand the process, understand their equipment. Can you easily change from one product to another? One of the things that we can do is instead of putting liquid on site, we can put the powdered equivalent. Can we make it down on site? That reduces transport miles. All of these things sort of just feed into that ultimate number. And as I said, they're sort of easier, lower hanging fruit. And then once you pick those out, then you refine it. But ultimately, there's lots of little bits that you can do to really make a huge impact, and that impact could be up to like 70 to 85% carbon reduction. We have seen on some of our customers' sites, which is with no change in performance or price. So again, it's like one of those. Why wouldn't you?
Mm. That's pretty significant reduction.
Yeah, I mean, there again, depending on the process, certain products work on certain different processes. So we have one product which has a really low carbon profile. It's made in the UK. It has low transport miles. The raw materials aren't primary raw materials; they're recycled and recovered. All these things has a significant impact then on the carbon footprint of that particular product, and that's how we try and source and sort of put products together, knowing where the raw material comes. Does it need to be raw, or can it be recycled? Can we get recovered material? What is the impact then on performance? Does it have an impact? So these are all things that we've already done. We know the answer to that. But then it's just then finding where that particular product fits into that process. And again, there's different scales of how low or lower that carbon footprint might be. But ultimately, it's usually between 40 to about 80, 85% in that range. So there's easy wins.
Yeah, it's impressive. I mean, everything you say kind of makes my brain go off in another direction on something. Wow, I'm conscious of time slightly, but if you're using a recycled product, do you have to, because you have to kind of draw a line somewhere, I suppose, or else it's always the first cause, because product A might be super, it might be have a very poor carbon footprint, and using a recycled version of that, because you can't just say, right, because it's recycled, it's plus 50 points. I mean, I don't know how the scoring system works. That was another thing I wanted to ask you about, is around scoring systems, but because you mentioned it's a 500 or a 150. How do you look at a recycled product?
Yeah, and you're so we again that sustainability and sort of recycle again can be one of those sort of quite generic terms, but ultimately it comes down to if we're looking at a raw material, whether it's recycled or in the manufacture of that raw material to get the product, what we can do. So, for example, if we're looking at metal-based inorganic coagulants. So if we're looking at iron-based products, for example, there's a pickling process. So in that, let's just take one of those parts of that process. If we're using acid in that pickling process, instead of having acid as a once through, can we filter, reuse the acid and retreat it? Because then that has a significant impact on the footprint. And then when we get the material before use, obviously what we need to be understanding is it still as active? Are there any additional impurities in there that's come about because we've used recycled material? So all that is vetted and tested, and obviously if it's not, it doesn't actually become a product. So every product that we do use has gone through that process, has been tested, and ultimately most of the products that we use will have gone through the various ISO accreditations and standards. So they're verifiable that they are top notch, they are quality, they have no impurities, and they work as they should work. So there are all these things and safety nets that we try to put in place as well, because ultimately, again, it's a bit like the carbon credit. What you don't want to be in a situation is just take my word for it. Take my word for it that it's low carbon, or this process happens, or take my word for it that it's sustainable. These are the things we're trying to put to the side and say, look, I'll show you. I don't have to explain anything. This is what it is, and these are the processes used to determine it. And for me, rather than having a waffle in terms of paragraphs and descriptives, here's some numbers, and here's the accreditations, and then that's easy for anyone to see.
Okay. And that scoring system was developed by yourself, or is it like a
no? It's again
scoring system?
Yeah, so it's just it's finding again it's finding the supply chain, finding processes where this can be implemented, and actually the people in our supply chain already have implemented this. So it's a matter of saying, right, well, if you're doing this, can you take the finished product as far as they're concerned? Can you run it through the various LCA models and tell us what the carbon footprint is? They will get the lab analysis about the impurities and all of that. They will do that. So most of it, the nice thing is like most of the products that we use, apart from the stuff that's in development, they're coming from reputable sources, reputable suppliers. So we have that cushion or that to fall back on. And obviously with the R&D stuff, with the projects we're doing at the minute, that's why it takes time, because you've got to prove that actually works. You got to prove the carbon case around it. Then you've got to prove the scale-up potential for that particular product. All of these things, that takes time. So where we can, we'll take sort of not off the shelf, but ready-made solutions. And whether we need to add to them, whatever, we can do that. But basically, the foundation of those particular products come from an accredited, reliable source, and so it takes away a lot of the donkey work in terms of having to actually prove it, because it's been proven already. So that's how we approach it at the minute.
Great. Well, I mean, thanks a lot, firstly, for coming on, for talking a lot about your business, what you're trying to do, explaining a lot of these things, and humouring me for sure. But yeah, before we go, where can listeners find out more about Chemion and about you?
Well, Chemion is chemion.co.uk. We have a little landing page there. There's some little videos. We do have a YouTube channel that we're just populating at the minute, where we have videos from on-site and customer sites where you can see our chemistries in action. And I'll make that available on LinkedIn in due course, so we're just popping at the minute. You'll find me on LinkedIn, Tim Robinson, Chemion. And the Chemion is on LinkedIn as well. So just the usual sources, just have a Google or a search on LinkedIn. You'll come across Chemion, and all those videos that we're going to put out on YouTube are already on LinkedIn. So you can have a peruse and have a look and see what we do. And any questions, by all means, email or just contact me through LinkedIn.
Perfect. Thanks again, Tim.
Thank you, Aaron. Cheers.